Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming to this far west side of Manhattan to join us today. For those of you that don't know, actually, this building used to be the printing press where they made all of the Broadway posters, which is why the hotel today is called Ink 48, why this is called the press room. But we could think of no better place to do an event about brands and brand building and think about how much that's evolved. So welcome and thank you. My name is Oscar Yuan. I lead Strategy3, which is Ipsos's brand consultancy.
And I'm Lindsay Franke. I manage our creative innovation and communities practice for the US. And we are so thrilled to have you all here this evening as our honored guest. We are excited to share just a little bit of content. Oscar and I love to be the people between you and cocktails, so sorry about that, but no, we hope to have a little bit of content today. We've got a lot of things prepared in a short period of time to hopefully foster some conversations later with cocktails. So really nice to be here. Look forward to mingling and talking with many of you later.
Fantastic. We have some of our Ipsos colleagues as well, Lorenzo Lorini, who's our North America CEO. I see Nick Mercurio, who is our head of our client org. I saw Lauren, who leads ESG for us globally. So hopefully you have a chance to have some conversation with them tonight. But really, I just want to tell you a little bit about why we're here today. I think that the number one reason is we want to share with you our latest thinking about brand building, how that's evolved, and our philosophy on that. You know, I think so much has changed in the last 3, 4, 5 years even. That we really think it was time for us to do a refresh on how we think about brands, how we build brands, how we measure brands, and so we want to share with you a little bit about that today. What we'll do is we have about 45 minutes of content, and then it'll be cocktails and food, so we'll leave you to that. Lindsay and I will spend about 10 minutes talking about some of the latest research we have and kind of what drives brand growth, what drives brand success. We will then have a special guest speaker, Dave Robson, who is the author of The Expectation Effect. And then we'll have a panel of some of our distinguished clients from Pepsi, from Coca-Cola. That's very bad. All right, I'm done here.
Get out of here, get out of here.
From Coca-Cola, from Grupo Bimbo, from MasterCard. We will have a conversation. We want to cover both kind of what the research says. It was totally intentional.
I made a bet with him if he would actually do that or not, so now I owe him 20
But we wanted to provide a perspective both from the research side, from the journalism, kind of media side, and then also from the client side to give you a sense of where we're going. So actually, I'm going to take this back now. Yeah. So the theme of tonight is we call change or be changed. And I think that the gist of it is really so much has changed, I said, in the environment around us that we really need to rethink how we think about building brands, right? If we think about how we build brands from 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 5 years ago, there's a little bit of disconnect of how we think about it today, right? So I'm not going to go through all the ways the world is changing, right? COVID-19, remote work, move to digital, war in Ukraine, inflation, all these things. This is too much. But I will pull a little interesting headline here, and I know we have a guest from Meta or some guests from Meta, so I apologize in advance. But this was a headline last week. It says, Mark Zuckerberg quietly buries the metaverse, right? So think about it. This is the CEO of Meta, right? And if you think about that, this is the speed of change in which things are happening, right? And I don't know, our guest from Meta, apologies, I don't know exactly what's happening at Meta, but Mark Zuckerberg posts, we are creating a new top-level product group at Meta focused on generative AI. We're pulling together a lot of teams working on generative AI across the company and the group, and he goes on and on and on. And if you think about us, many of you who are building brands, many of us that are helping our clients build brands 6 months ago, we were putting all of our thinking behind, okay, what are we doing in the metaverse? Are we building plans around this? And then this comes out next week and it's like, do we do a shift, right? How do we think about this? The speed at which change is happening in the way we build brands is really driving some of this conversation for us today.
I think, one of the things that we talked about that Oscar mentioned is just the acceleration and the need to pivot very quickly as we see technology changing and evolving really rapidly. So we have to kind of think about, we'll talk about our framework and how we're kind of evolving with that to help really drive brand growth.
Yeah, and if you think about how we've been taught to build brands, right? We've been told, brands are measured through rational and emotional associations, and these associations form attributes, and these are attributes that we measure, and they're inputs into how we build a brand, and we have a pyramid, or we have a house, or we have a Greek pantheon, or whatever our model is, right? We've been told again and again that brands, if you happen to be Byron Sharp, they need to be mentally and physically available, they need to be meaningfully different, right? If you're Daniel Kahneman, it's system one, system two, there's so many models of how we build brands, and yet I think those of us that are brand builders in the room say all the time, makes sense, but doesn't really tie exactly to the commercial realities that I'm looking at, right? And so that's part of this conversation we want to start today. And so we've been told again and again, brands are dynamic, and in fact, it's the world around us that is dynamic, right? And in fact, I would argue, the way we build brands, the way we think about brands is actually somewhat static, right? I know those of you that are, here's the metrics we're looking at, here are the attributes we measure quarter on quarter on quarter. In reality, is that how people think and evaluate and consider brands? It's just a question for you. But let's take a look at a video here on what we're talking about.
Brands are no longer in control. In a dynamic world, people are. But by actively shaping their expectations, brands can make powerful connections and bring more to people's lives.
I like to think I am rational and objective, but
in reality, my decisions are driven by
My heart.
Habits, emotions,
my experiences.
Environment. The things around me.
and my needs.
You want to grow your brand, generate experiences and engagement.
But the story doesn't start with you.
It starts with me.
You need to listen to me and talk to me.
Engage me.
Empathize with me.
So you can understand me.
And millions of people like me.
At Ipsos, we help you understand the role your brand can play in people's lives. We uncover their unique contexts and what's important in their lives. We turn data into insights and strategies, which empower you to shape people's expectations, so only your brand can meet them.
All right. So, one of the things that there we go. Wanted to kind of talk about is how this kind of evolution of people being in control of the conversation plays a role into what we need to think about in terms of total human understanding. And our new brand success framework that we're going to talk about today and just give a kind of high-level overview of some of the different components and what we've found in some of our extensive research globally across many different categories to kind of understand these three kind of core elements around expectations, context, and empathy. And when we think about this, it's really about an additive value add framework that's going to help us really add an additional lens to kind of get in the minds of consumers, because there's so many more expectations from people today as we think about, I want you to relate to me as a consumer, as a citizen, as a professional, as a parent, as a patient, and really understanding and getting to the heart of what those consumer expectations are. So when we think about our research framework, just wanted to share a little bit about the research that we've done. We've done this across 7 different categories and 5 different countries, and see how all of these different components interplay together to really drive brand choice. And you'll see here there's different contribution levels. This obviously changes depending on category or country, and there's a lot of interconnection across these. But what we have found in our research is that the brands that score higher on these components together really drive a higher purchase share or category share or business performance. And we see this here with a couple categories. We also know that it's consistently proven across financial services. This is an example we have from UK banking example. And this just really underpins the importance of understanding consumers' expectations, the context in which they operate and choose brands, and how to engage with them in an empathetic way to really shape expectations. And so one of the things that we'll dive into just briefly on kind of each of those little things today, because it is Ipsos After Hours, and we want you guys to have time to network and enjoy the conversation together. But want to talk about expectation setting and shaping expectations, which we have David here who's going to come up and talk about this from kind of the academic world and what we think about and know from a human perspective. But when we think about it from a brand perspective, what we mean by shaping expectations is really about thinking of all the different facets that a consumer or individual can engage with your brand or company or service. And so we think about this from things like sensory cues, functional and emotional expectations, social expectations, how it makes me look, how it makes me feel with others, and that might be why I choose a brand, and also experience expectations. So, knowing that experience I'm gonna get from logging onto my favorite streaming provider, from my favorite lip gloss to my favorite pair of shoes. Or even my favorite credit card out of my wallet, which I do have one. So if you want to know, I'll tell you later, not on stage. And so when we think about shaping consumers' expectations and really understanding that, I wanted to kind of highlight what those experiences are. So we think about a really nice bottle of wine, high end, you get to hold it, feel the label, you have an expectation that comes with that price point that you're buying for that bottle of wine. It's much more different than if you were handed maybe a more expensive bottle of wine hidden in a kind of bag saying, hey, try this. You're gonna have a different expectation. So really that opportunity with brand building of shaping expectations for that experience in terms of all the different sensories, the feelings that you might get. The same reason that consumers might feel better by wearing a high-end label brand. They have an expectation of how it's gonna make them feel, how others are gonna see them. The same with carrying a certain device. And so when we think about what you're communicating and connecting with consumers to grow, it's really about the expectations are shaped by experiences and how you deliver those experiences and engage with consumers. But it doesn't stop there, it's also about context.
Context. So, Lindsay talked a lot about how expectations are constantly shifting. The other thing that's constantly shifting is context, right? So Rajit from Coca-Cola, I always say, imagine, you have an image of two friends sharing a Coca-Cola in the park on a beautiful day, right? Great brand imagery, this is what your image of them. Imagine an empty bottle of Coke on a pristine beach when you're trying to go for a beautiful walk. Different perception of the same brand, the same imagery, very different contexts, right? So I think one of the ways we think about how we evaluate, consider brands is really around context. And in fact, the context influences the expectations that I have, right, for that brand. And I think that's what's really, really critical here is these are things, again, that are constantly shifting and changing. And so for us to really understand the context in which brands are operating is really, really critical. And context is complicated, right? There is macro context, right? So what are we thinking about the world around us? What are we thinking about in terms of sustainability, in terms of climate change? What does this brand stand for in the world, right? Then there's micro context. Who am I with? What am I doing? Am I at a bar? Am I at home? Is it hot? Is it cold? Right? All of those contextual clues actually change your perception of that brand, which makes it really, really interesting and challenging, right? So if you think about the traditional things that we measure, and we've done this research, traditional things that we measure, the category benefits, that counts for half of people's choice, right? The other half is this new part, and this is why we're having this conversation today, are things that we haven't measured traditionally, or we haven't looked at traditionally. What are the contextual clues that are driving choice? And I'll give you an example here. So this was, as Lindsay said, we did a lot of research across different categories in different countries. We looked at streaming in France, right? So if you think about this, Which streaming service do I choose? Well, it depends on the context, right? If I'm in France, and 56% of our brand choice is driven by the context, if I'm having an evening entertainment alone or with my partner, that's a Netflix moment, right? That said, if I'm doing something else, I'm doing chores, I'm having something run in the background, that's a YouTube moment, right? If I'm having friends over, if I'm having entertainment evening, then suddenly Universal pops into the mix, right? So in fact, the contextual environment which you're looking at actually changes your consideration set for brands. And so for us to say that these are the brand attributes that we always measure, this is what we look at, these are the things that are important to us, actually gives us a little bit of a fallacy in kind of when we're evaluating what's really happening in the lives of consumers, right? So that's context.
Yeah, and I think, it's important to understand this additional layer, but it's not just about kind of how we use these occasions to shape expectations of consumers and understand the context, but it's also about the empathy and the way in which we engage. And so I think, one of the things when we think about empathy and what we mean by empathy is really meeting people where they are in their lives and understanding the role you can play in a meaningful and unique way. So one of the examples I love here, and I wish I had a baby for like 1 minute on stage so I could demonstrate this, but
just 1 minute, that's it, don't worry.
Yeah, but one of the things, so an infant formula brand really operating in an empathetic way worked with their product team to develop a package that could be opened and a bottle could be made with one hand, right? So empathetic to the context in which the way parents are, holding a child, struggling, trying to do something. And so I think, when we talk about how brands can really showcase empathy and be that top choice, it's thinking about that context in which your consumers are operating and, willing to engage with your brands. And so, another thing is it's not just about how you deliver, how you engage with people, but it's also about how you communicate with them. And, we know, probably everyone in this room, we know the evidence that really strong creative is more effective. But one of the things that we did a large R&D project on globally was pairing really strong creative with empathy. And so creative that was empathetic actually performed 20% higher in terms of ROI for a brand. So kind of pairing those two things together really helped to drive strong communication and engagement with a brand. And so one of the examples we just have here just for today is a Volvo example. Again, kind of continuing with my parent mom mode this week, but a Volvo ad where they really went into the empathetic tension of the craziness of not having sleep as a new parent. And they built into this tension their communication around a new safety feature that they were launching in their cars around kind of lane guidance. And so we'll share that here.
Hard times in the mill. Every morning right at 6. Don't that old bell make you sick? Hard times in the mill, my love. Hard times in the mill. Every morning at 4:30.
Yeah, and so what that ad does is it really plays up a fear when we were working with them on building the communication plan. Is there's a parental fear about being tired and falling asleep at the wheel and being unsafe, and so that was something that they really dove into in terms of their communication about Volvo helping keep you safe and being kind of the conduit to that. So these are just a couple examples of how we look at empathy and things to think about when you're really looking at getting closer to your consumer. So as I mentioned before, we wanted to kind of give a real quick high level. As I mentioned, we're here at Ipsos After Hours to use this as an opportunity to spark some conversation, network, meet with many different colleagues around the industry. This is just the beginning. We have a lot more detail behind this. We have a lot of things to share. We're going to hear a little bit from David and from our clients that are here to kind of talk about what we're seeing and how we should be thinking about this.